I hope you all had a Merry Christmas. It got a little too American for me when I saw what was trending on formerly known as Twitter. If you aren't from America and this doesn't make any sense, good for you.
What would the president say is his foreign policy achievement of the year?
Look at what Israel's been able to do to put pressure on Hamas in the wake of the worst terrorist attack that they've ever succumbed to.
When it comes to the Gaza ceasefire, no possibility.
Even if you aren't from America, you've probably heard about us pressuring Israel to be a little less obvious about its war crimes. Internal statements made to his party reveal Bibi isn't losing sleep over it, though.
The Biden administration has been more open about its desire to see Israel be more strategic and surgical and spare civilian lives in its operations. Does the Netanyahu government continue to have solid relations with the Biden administration? Do they feel like there's being more pressure put on them by the Biden administration to be more cognizant of those civilian casualties?
Well, sour is not a word that applies here. You know, Secretary Lloyd Austin was just here a few days ago, and he reiterated that the U.S. support to Israel's effort here is unshakable. And Secretary Blinken just spoke a few days ago and also said things in that nature. We are in lockstep with Washington. Jerusalem and Washington see eye to eye about what in what pertains to the goals of this war.
Thank you for being side by side with us in this effort. The Hamas is a terror organization that built itself for a decade to fight Israel, and they built infrastructure under the ground.
Fight Shifa Hospital from day one, because this is the headquarters. Everyone knows where it is. We have the location. We shared intelligence with all our friends, so they know Shifa Hospital is the headquarters of Hamas. Why we didn't attack Shifa Hospital so far? You know, one reason. We care about the people inside, and we're trying to find international solutions, including with all our friends, including friends in the Arab world, how to evacuate the patients so they can have alternative hospital, so they can get a proper treatment, and we can make sure that the Shifa Hospital will be what it is, a military facility based as headquarters of Hamas.
You have a circumstance where the first war crime is being committed by Hamas by having their headquarters, their military, hidden under a hospital. And that's a fact. That's what's happened.
And on the ground, and it is not easy to destroy them. It will take and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months, but we will win and we will destroy them. So thank you once again for coming to Israel, for helping us, and for supporting us, and I'm looking forward to our meeting.
Israel is a cop state. The extent of most IDF combat experience is beating up pregnant women at military checkpoints, and we constantly see the use of cop logic and abuser rhetoric. The two kinda do tend to go together, at least in 40% of cases. The US, as the wife of the abusive father, always tells us, you're doing this to yourself. You're forcing him to do this to you. Everyone else would react the same way. Well, he's doing is good for you. Stopping isn't in your interest. He has good intentions, but sometimes makes mistakes, so there's a gap between intentions and results. But he feels bad about hitting you, and no one else in the world does more for you.
Look, we certainly share the concerns that so many of others have concerned, including the Secretary General, about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Name me one more nation, any other nation, that's doing as much as the United States to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. You can't. You just can't. And name another nation that is doing more to urge the Israeli counterparts, our Israeli counterparts, to be as cautious and deliberate as they can be in the prosecution of their military operations. You can't.
You mentioned, far too many Palestinians have been killed. You've mentioned a gap between the intent and the result. So I'm wondering, at this point in stage, that gap appears, to me at least, or to observers, to be widening. And as to what extent are you going to allow that to widen even more? In other words, is there a red line for you?
The last couple of months have been gut-wrenching when you see the suffering of men, women, and especially children in Gaza. That affects each of us. Well, let me speak for myself. It affects me very, very deeply, which is why we're so intent on seeing this through to completion quickly, effectively, and doing everything possible to minimize the harm to those who are caught in the crossfire of Hamas's making.
They are victims of their own leadership.
Well, they're also
That's the
victims of
difference.
Israeli bombs.
No, they're the victims of this barbaric attack on the 7th of October.
It is Hamas who is responsible for the loss of Israeli and Gazan lives alike.
And again, I come back to this basic proposition. There seems to be silence on what Hamas could do, should do, must do, if we want to end the suffering of innocent men, women, and children. It would be, I think, good if the world could unite around that proposition as well.
The best diplomacy, the best progress in diplomatic pursuits is to do it privately and outside the public eye, and we'll continue to do that as well.
So, if the U.S. and Israel are publicly in lockstep, what conversations is Joe Brandon having with his donors? Well, he expresses disapproval while repeating the exact same genocidal, exterminationist rhetoric, calling Palestinians animals, a brutal, ugly, inhumane people who have to be eliminated. And before you defend what he's saying, keep in mind, Hamas is just a euphemism for Palestinians. He even makes this exact Freudian slip. He continues to repeat debunked blood libel about burned and beheaded babies in literally dehumanizing statements. He would never even refer to extremist settlers as brutal, ugly, inhumane people who have to be eliminated, because to him, Jews are human beings and Palestinians are not. When Israel bombs tens of thousands of civilians, with 95% of deaths being civilians, it's Israel fulfilling its obligation to defend itself from, the territory it's occupying.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
When about half of deaths on October 7th were civilians, it's the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. No matter what, we're not going to do a single thing other than protect Israel. Not a single thing. But this has become so normal that the highlights of this meeting were him saying that while American support for Israel is unconditional, Israel, it may lose some support from Europe with its war crimes.
Yeah, let me just follow up quickly. You said Israel needs to follow international law. Are you confident they are following international law?
What I can say is it is not our position, certainly my position as a policymaker, to play real-time judge and jury on the question of any particular incident.
We must continue to document Russia's war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
You just said he speaks for foreign policy, and he said yesterday that there were indiscriminate attacks, which to the rest of the world is a war crime. So why isn't the United States not saying that that's what it is?
The president was speaking to his concerns about making sure we're seeing the results that Israel has claimed is their intent, which is to reduce civilian casualties. That's what he's talking about.
What's wrong with them? What's wrong with standing here and say when Israel do something wrong, because you are the best friend, you have leverage on them, why not criticizing them?
Your question presupposes that we've made some determination that the law of armed conflict has been violated, and I don't think we're not at that point.
You disagree with the UN?
I would just tell you that we're not going to react in near real time to every event. Israel has a right and a responsibility to defend itself, and we're going to make sure they have the tools and capabilities to do that.
And of course, what separates Israel, the United States, and other democracies when it comes to incredibly difficult situations like this is our respect for international law.
Israel has not only a right but an obligation to defend itself and to try to make sure that October 7th never happens again. Any other country in the world faced with what Israel suffered on October 7th would do the same thing.
When the ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism.
The other major highlight is Brandon saying this is the most conservative government in Israeli history, that they don't want anything approaching a two-state solution and only want to have retribution for what the Palestinians did. Yet, despite admitting that these people only want to punish all Palestinians, Genocide Joe still gives them unconditional support. Because as I've shown, in his own words, Palestinians are all inhuman animals who have to be eliminated. In the very same meeting, he's denouncing Trump dehumanizing his enemies as vermin. He further asks if the blood of our country being poisoned sounds familiar. You know, I know I've heard this somewhere else recently. Let me think. Oh, I remember.
This is a fight of Western civilization against jihadi ideology that wanted to commit a genocide in the Jewish people in Israel. I think this is not a thing that could have made Israel not to exist. They always refused. And I tell you why they refused, because they said, unless you give us the right of return, we're not willing to sign any agreement with Israel. So the very basic idea of the Palestinian hood is to say, we need to have our refugees back to the Green Line, which is where is modern Israel. Basically, they want to make sure Israel won't exist.
So the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust isn't an existential threat, but refugees' right of return is. That's right. Reversing ethnic cleansing would poison the blood of Israel. It would be a genocide against all Jews. Despite the private admissions of war crimes, it's impossible to live in a world besides one in which the victims are the Jews. Well, the Germans had some legitimate grievances over Versailles, but we agree their claim to victimhood ended when they started stripping people of their citizenship and forcing them into ghettos and camps.
What is striking to me is that even as, again, we hear many countries urging the end to this conflict, which we would all like to see, I hear virtually no one saying, demanding of Hamas that it stop hiding behind civilians, that it lay down its arms, that it surrender. This is over tomorrow if Hamas does that. This would have been over a month ago, 6 weeks ago, if Hamas had done that. And how can it be that there are no demands made of the aggressor and only demands made of the victim?
My view is one side is guilty, and it's not Israel.
The victims here are the Jews.
I'm not a vigilante.
No, you're a victim. He knew what he was signing up for. You've always been a part of this. You just never had to look it in the eye. One dead kid, there's hundreds more where he came from.
So it would be good if there was a strong international voice pressing Hamas to do what's necessary to end this. And again, that could be tomorrow.
Our definition of Jews as victims and criticism of Zionism as anti-Semitism, despite facts on the ground, really begins to break down our rhetoric on Russia and Ukraine.
You know, I heard this word genocide tossed around about.
After the genocide was committed in the south area of Israel,
Your family budget, your ability to fill up your tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide in half a world away.
Yes, I call this genocide because it's become clearer and clearer that Putin is just trying to wipe out the idea of being Ukrainian.
Hamas actually does have genocidal intentions against the people of Israel. They'd like to see it wiped off the map. They've said so on purpose.
I don't know how you could have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel. They want a permanent war. I don't know how you have a permanent ceasefire with an attitude like that.
Likud doesn't speak from the river to the sea. It's not a phrase that exists anywhere in the manifesto of any party in Israel. I don't think there is one person in Gaza that his dream is to live next to any person in Israel in coexistence village. I don't think there is even one. Everyone in Israel wants peace.
We were looking for babies, but there is no babies left. No, maybe I killed a girl, she was 12, but I'm looking for a baby.
יבגני, פתח כבש! פריקה בשלוש! שלוש! עברתי שלב! חבר'ה, בעל הבית צריך להרגיש בעל הבית. אז עושים את זה כמו שצריך. אי אפשר לבזבז כזה מזג האוויר. הכל שלנו, שימו לב, תראו איזה טיילת, ועכשיו, תכירו, החוף של נובה.
Here you see troops setting fire to food and aid, and this is in Shajaya, which is a neighborhood in Gaza. One soldier says in this video, "We turn on the light against this dark place and burn it until there is no trace."
ואני אכן גאה על כך שמנעתי את הקמתה של מדינה פלסטינית.
I have zero empathy to people that time after time refuse to recognize the right of the Jewish state to their homeland.
As disturbing as it is that this rhetoric works, perhaps more disturbing is the fact that it works no matter who uses it. Israel has the exact same stated war aims in Gaza as Russia does in Ukraine. While we have enthusiastically denounced Russia's war crimes and characterized them as genocide, we give unconditional cover to the far more brutal and deadly war crimes and genocide of Israel.
Bucha is not normal. Mariupol is not normal. Irpin is not normal. Bombing schools and hospitals and apartment buildings to rubble is not normal.
There will be peace when we achieve the goals that you mentioned. Let's get back to them. They don't change. Let me remind you of what we talked about. Denazification.
I think it was Hillary Clinton that said they're poisoning the minds and the hearts of the children. And this is the problem. I think any future solution will must deal with education. We cannot have Israeli children are raised since they are in kindergarten on the idea of peace. Peace is something we pray for every single day. And I think the fact that we were so peace lovers created 7th of October because we couldn't believe that the enemy is capable of doing those type of things. We said, if only we will have a separation, we'll go back to the international border, Gaza will be a peaceful place. And look what happened.
Demilitarization.
No military capabilities.
A neutral status.
Should the Palestinians, if they have a state, should they be able to sign, let's say, a military agreement, a military treaty with Iran? And the answer, in our view, is clearly no.
We must not let President Putin's callous indifference to human life become our own.
It's much too late for that, Anthony. Putin has taken your playbook and used it against you. You've played the victim so convincingly that you're attracting imitators. And you know what they say about imitation being the most sincere form of flattery. Not to be outdone, in just 2 months, Israel's wreaked more destruction than the razing of Syria's Aleppo between 2012 and 2016. Ukraine's Mariupol, or, proportionally, the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. It has killed more civilians than the US-led coalition did in its 3-year campaign against the Islamic State group.
The breathtaking naivete of the assertion that there are no connections between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, when Saddam Hussein was providing payments to the families of suicide bombers sponsored by Hamas, when Hamas and al-Qaeda have intimate ties.
Israel doing its best to protect civilians is worse than any other actor in a conflict zone in the 21st century. This is why we had to paint the Palestinians as worse than ISIS and the Nazis in our propaganda, and why counter-propaganda humanizing Palestinians is just as important. So important, Western journalists have to aggressively fight against it to make the country that's fighting a 7-front war they intend to pursue for years into victims.
This is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
We have, that word, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only, that they don't target civilians.
Well, that's simply not the truth, unfortunately.
Planned, military incursions.
Yes, but it's not the truth,
yes, civilians are dying.
Civilians are dying, and the way that the bombs are getting dropped, I don't believe are in a targeted way. Nothing from what I'm hearing on the ground suggests that the bombs have been dropped in a targeted way. Our social media manager, all 5 houses around him got blown up. They estimate 100 people were killed in them. Yesterday, his house was the last one remaining in the neighborhood. They leveled an entire neighborhood.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
and I do need to make that qualification, of course, that that it is always denied by the Israelis that genocide is taking place. They say these are strategic planned strikes in Gaza and that they are targeting the militant group Hamas.
But I'm here to let the world know that that's not the case.
Kareem, you've been able to have your say. This is what the Israelis will always say in response to that.
I love you. Abolish Israel. Happy New Year. I'll see you then.